Because it's the internet world now.
Live.
I will just make note of that because I was just thinking when the videos of the halaqah are never going to get out there because Raju's never going to have enough time. It's okay. The people who are online can volunteer as well. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So so we could perhaps
You've got my details. You can
reach out to some people and see if all Raju has to do is just train them up on some basic tasks and give them access to the software, and that's it. I think we have a spare machine upstairs with the software loaded up, as far as I know, like powerful enough to deal with things like this. Because I remember that's the one Akil was using. Okay. But what would be really good is during
leave everything as is.
It would be good because during this break as well, we could perhaps, one at a time, start putting up videos. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So Imam al-Muhasibi says,
So can I interrupt? Obviously, you've got bank holiday next week, and then Ramadan. Can you send out?
So that's okay. So
we'll send out the emails as soon as.
So it's apparently it's bank holiday next week. So given how it's been during these quiet periods, I think it's a good idea to not have a halaqah, and then we break for Ramadan.
Week after.
Yeah. So what we'll do? Well, it won't be on Monday, will it? No, it might be. Yeah, it will. It will be Ramadan. So we break from next week.
We have the first Monday after Ramadan, and then the following week we start.
Okay, so we break from next week. No halaqah through Ramadan, and then we'll let everybody know about the plans after Ramadan. From my point of view, I want to carry on and try to finish this. These guys keep asking me how many more sessions it's going to take, and I keep saying I don't know. And however, it might not be possible to continue on a Monday. Maybe we'll have to continue on a different day or something. But we'll decide that during Ramadan and let everyone know, inshallah. Okay. Our online viewers, do they register, and do you have their email addresses as well? You don't?
No, not everyone registers.
So is there a way for them to send their details in?
Yes, if they just write to info@Ibrahim College.
So online viewers, if there's any of them there today? I don't know if any are there.
There isn't anyone yet.
Okay, so perhaps I'll mention it. Yeah. There must be a way for us to know who they are.
They have to register, but not everyone registers.
But they probably have done already.
We won't know. It's the same people. If we just put it like this, so not the first Monday after Eid, the following Monday we're on, and then from that day we can make any changes. So at least everyone's aware.
Right.
Second Monday back after Ramadan.
So second Monday after Ramadan.
After Eid, yeah.
If there's any changes, all right. So second Monday after Eid. So not the Monday after Eid, but the one after.
Yeah.
And then you'll email everybody confirming everything, and if anything changes.
And if people put their email to us, then we can give them more information.
All right. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Why did you change?
The only reason why it might change, I'm not saying it will change. The only reason why it might change is if anything changes for me. Because I'm on a bit of sabbatical, as you know. My sabbatical will end probably end of June. Which means that I'll start, some probably towards the end of Ramadan, I'll start looking at what I'm doing post-sabbatical and how that will affect my diary. So if anything really, really critical comes up that I have to do on a Monday, then I might have to shift the day of the halaqah. But that's only if. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying it will, but I'm just I'm just leaving that open as a possibility. Because at the moment I have a fairly free diary, but the moment I'm out of, I'm trying to strictly take a break. But the moment that ends, I'm likely to, it'll be literally like, opening the floodgates. So I'll suddenly become really busy really, really quickly. So I'm trying to manage it and control it as much as I can. But,
What if you don't get many students together, especially with the courses that is
I think that's always a possibility. So all of the students at EC who attend classes on Monday will miss out on the Halaqah, which is why the idea was to create a situation where we rotate days so that students who are studying on other days also get opportunity to attend Halaqah, as well as eventually run multiple Halaqahs. The multiple Halaqahs require the approval of other teachers. So other teachers who want to do a Halaqah, slowly they might, provided Brother Khalis and these guys organize it. If other teachers want to do a Halaqah, so there might be like a Monday Halaqah with me, but a Wednesday one with somebody else and a different topic. Does that make sense? So there are. That was the initial thinking anyway, and I started this one off just to get the process, just to get the ball rolling. So there's a possibility that there might be a fiqh halaqah or some other halaqah of some sort that's run by a different teacher, and it's simultaneous. So even if Monday students can't attend this halaqah, they can attend another one with another teacher, say on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's really what I wanted. I mean, the vision came from this what they used to have in traditional seminaries, where the masajid used to have lots of halaqas on different days, and students used to manage their schedule to eventually rotate and kind of learn from each one. It's difficult to get the commitment from the teachers, but that's the principle. Yeah. So there is a degree of unpredictability with my schedule going forward. That's the only reason. But I'm going to try and resist it as much as I can. I'll try and keep the Monday evening free.
the other teachers have other jobs.
Now, most of them will be working here, but then those who are full time, it'll be a question. They probably already have, because most of them will probably do a halaqah somewhere, or they have some engagements in the evenings and so on. They probably do a lot of their volunteer stuff, that hour work, that kind of thing in the evenings. So yeah, and time is an issue. So if mostly if you're teaching, if you've got a full teaching schedule, you can probably squeeze in one evening halaqah type commitment a week. So if you're already doing one, you're unlikely to be able to do another. So like I know Sheikh Mujahid teaches, he has a Hayat al-Sahaba halaqah somewhere in East Ham, doesn't he? Do you know? So I think he teaches Hayat al-Sahaba so Hayat al-Sahaba is an Arabic book on the lives of the companions, and I think he has a halaqah on that in a masjid further east. So most likely, if we said to him, would you do another one? He'd say, let me conclude that, and then perhaps. So it's that kind of situation. And I know like most of the guys probably have got something or other. So we kind of have to wait for an opening and then grab them. Yeah. With me, there is this possibility of a TV show happening. So that I do have an interest to give a bit of time to media. So like maybe just one hour a week or something like that to media. I had a show before. I'm keeping an open mind about continuing it or not continuing it. So I took a break basically since Hajj. I've taken a break. So there's a possibility of going back to that, and that used to be 9 to 10 on a Monday evening. Does that make sense? But when I committed to the halaqah, my thinking was that I would finish the halaqah here, and then take a little break, and then drive over there for the TV show. That was the idea. But there's a possibility of doing a different show, and I don't know how that might play out. So there's these variables, basically. Anyway, so we'll see, inshallah. And in any case, we'll make sure everyone knows. So continuing on from some general points of advice in the last session before the break, Imam al-Muhasibi says, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَا يَصِلُ الْعَبْدُ إِلَيْهِ مِنَ الْفَهَمِ بقدر تقديم عقله وموجود علمه بتقواه لله وطاعته. فمن وهب الله له العقل وأحياه بالعلم بعد الإيمان وبصره باليقين عيوب نفسه فقد نظمت له خصال البر. فاطلب البر في التقوى وخذ العلم من أهل الخشية. So he says, know that whatever a slave of Allah has achieved in understanding, so whatever understanding a slave of Allah has achieved by way of the measure of their intelligence, right, and the amount of knowledge that they possess, so by way of that, it is because of their taqwa and their obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that ultimately true understanding and true beneficial knowledge comes as a consequence of the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what he means by that you'll understand later, because he kind of goes on to elaborate what true intelligence is, or true intellect is, and true knowledge is in his understanding in the next paragraph, I think. So then he says, so whoever Allah has granted intellect to and has brought to life with knowledge, أحياه بالعلم, after having given him knowledge, and whoever Allah has given insight with conviction, given him insight with conviction into the flaws of his self, meaning his own flaws, his own weaknesses, his own uyub, own deficiencies, then such a person, so the issues are that Allah has given a person intellect, has given him life through knowledge, meaning brought him to life through knowledge, as if to say a person who hasn't enjoyed knowledge, hasn't given themselves knowledge, is basically like a dead person. But importantly, knowledge that is built on Iman, knowledge after Iman, not knowledge without Iman. And on top of that, has given them insight into their own faults, meaning they have self-awareness, they have an awareness of their own faults. Who is this person? So the person who possesses those qualities, those attributes, such a person has all of the characteristics of goodness, right? فَقَدْ نُظِمَتْ لَهُ خِصَالُ الْبِرِّ. Nuzim is like all of the characteristics of goodness have been strung together for that person, right? So nuzima implies stringing something together the way pearls are strung. The same verb is used for stringing a pearl. فَقَدْ نُظِمَتْ لَهُ خِصَالُ الْبِرِّ. Now, the Arabic word for goodness is bir. It's actually worth dwelling on this. We've dwelled on it before. So the word bir implies goodness in general. So it's generally a kind of a multivocal word with lots of different meanings, lots of layers of meaning. And I've mentioned before, I think, that the meaning I like to pinpoint often, although without necessarily narrowing its broadness, but I think the one that's really relevant to us practically is from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he himself says, "Al-birru husnul khuluq." That the word bir, using that word, goodness is good character, is husnul khuluq. right? So in that sense, basically all good characteristics, all good traits have been gathered in the person who has been granted intellect, knowledge, and has been granted self-awareness, so that they're able, they have an understanding, a knowledge and an understanding and an insight into their own faults. And therefore, so this is the person. So فَاطْلُبِ الْبِرَّ فِي التَّقْوَى وَخُذِ الْعِلْمَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْخَشْيَةِ. And then, so this is kind of a description of the person, and then there is what such a person should do. And so he says, فَاطْلُبِ الْبِرَّ فِي التَّقْوَى, seek goodness, bir, so seek goodness in taqwa. This is I'm going to unpack this a little bit. وَخُذِ الْعِلْمَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْخَشْيَةِ, and seek knowledge from the people of fear, meaning people who have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People of khashya are people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take knowledge from those people. Why? Because taking knowledge from people like that won't result in arrogance, because you're taking it from people who are committed to humility. Does that make sense? Because knowledge by its nature, knowledge makes people arrogant. So when I speak to students here, particularly the full-time students, one of the things I always do every year, at least several sessions where this is repeated, this idea of afatul ilm, the calamities of knowledge, or the tragedies of knowledge, right? And essentially, it's like a risk assessment of knowledge as seekers of knowledge. And first and foremost, so one of the greatest tragedies and calamities of knowledge is arrogance, because knowledge because it elevates a person, but by its very nature, the elevation of a person almost naturally comes with a degree of awareness of one's elevation, right? And that is the primary ingredient for arrogance, right? Because people who actually nobody takes a person seriously if they behave arrogantly but actually do not possess any attributes. Does that make sense? So when a person is behaving arrogantly but they have no physical strength, they're not particularly intelligent, they're not particularly good looking or beautiful, they're not well endowed, right? But they're behaving arrogantly. Generally what tends to happen is it inspires belittlement from people. People look down on people like that and thinking like, what are you so big-headed about, right? And therefore people who are endowed with something, that they have something to be proud of, basically, tend to be the people who carry with it a measure of arrogance. And of all of the things that a person can be endowed, knowledge is the most valuable, the most profound. And often with knowledge comes other forms of success, other forms of benefit, and so on, and other ni'am, other bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, one of the greatest calamities of knowledge is arrogance. And therefore, the best people to take knowledge from are people of humility, right? Which is why Imam Malik's mother, that told him when he was going to study that take from your teacher's forbearance before you take from his knowledge, meaning learn their character before you learn, observe their character before you observe their knowledge. And that is extremely important. So, and this was a feature of traditional learning, in that traditional learning emphasized the importance of learning from a teacher, not because you get the correct understanding, but because you take from the teacher's character. The first part of that, فَاطْلُبِ الْبِرَّ فِي التَّقْوَى, seek goodness in taqwa. That's important in this, and I want to deliberately, and there are much, so I'm going to acknowledge it first and foremost that there's lots of ways to interpret this sentence, but I'm going to specifically interpret it deliberately like this: that bir here means husnul khuluq. Bir here means husnul khuluq, meaning it means good character. And he's saying seek good character in taqwa. Does that make sense? So why am I picking that out? Because there is a hadith in which the Prophet, there's several, in fact, a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ brings those two things together, brings taqwa and husnul khuluq together as two entities that require separate attention. Okay? Two aspects of the human being that require separate attention. So one hadith is the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says two things will play the greatest influence in taking a person to paradise. One of them is taqwa, God consciousness. The other is, or if you like, conscious fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other is good character. Right? Now, he is bringing the two together in a different way, which is seek good character in taqwa. That's important. That's important because of the two, taqwa comes first, because taqwa is rooted in iman. Taqwa by definition is rooted in faith, because there is no taqwa without belief in Allah, because it is by definition consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which comes from faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which comes from a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which comes from Allah's awareness and so on. And remember, taqwa is completely internal. So how a person looks, behaves, prays, speaks, eats, drinks, sleeps, etc., are all, when it comes to their taqwa, are all just manifestations. They're all kind of phenomena, which may or may not represent their taqwa. Their taqwa is completely internal. Therefore, for that reason, taqwa is a kind of truth, right? Because if you have it, then it's inside. There is no taqwa outside. There's no such thing as taqwa outside. Outside are just its fruits, its symptoms. Does that make sense? Yeah? Taqwa sits in here. So it's possible for a taqwa, the Prophet ﷺ says, at-taqwa hahuna. There's a hadith in which he says, at-taqwa hahuna. Taqwa is in here. Okay? So while if a person has taqwa, its manifestation will be that they will pray, and they will give sadaqah, and they will give zakah, and they will do hajj, and they will have good conduct. All of the manifestations will be there. It is possible, however, for a person to have all of those manifestations but to not have taqwa inside, because the manifestations are like the manifestations that we saw in the hypocrites. Okay? So essentially, taqwa is here. And therefore, everything that is built upon taqwa has validity, and therefore the same is true of husnul khuluq, or good conduct. Now, why is it important to say that about good character? Because of all of the things, the one thing that is the most likely to exist in a person without taqwa is good character. Because good character is, at a human level, it is acknowledged as good. It's a universal good. Generosity is universally good. Compassion is universally good. Love is universally good, right? Benevolence is universally good. Patience is universally good, and so on and so forth, right? And therefore, anyone that has that is a person of good character. A Muslim can have it, a non-Muslim can have it, a muttaqi, a person of taqwa can have it, a person who is a sinner can have good character. And therefore, that in a believer, to attain the heights of in terms of rank in the dunya and in the akhirah, that comes from being a believer with taqwa, in order for that qualification to exist, this point has to be acknowledged, that taqwa, that akhlaq has to be built on taqwa. Akhlaq has to be through taqwa. Okay? Because without it, yes, it's important, it's good, it's beneficial in the dunya, but it won't be beneficial in the akhirah, because it isn't for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this actually points us to a really, really important piece of spiritual philosophy for us, which is pretty much rooted in our theology, that things that are even naturally human, it is a requirement of our iman. It is a requirement of our iman and our sincerity and our taqwa to try to find a way to orient those natural traits, those natural instincts towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though they are natural. The reason why this is important is because in this modern stroke postmodern lifestyle, there is a tendency to secularize those traits and actually detach them from Allah. Does that make sense? To try to kind of humanize them and treat them as, and present them as universal points of commonality between other human beings. However, there is a uniqueness for a Muslim that is important, because without it they lose their spiritual value, and that is that they still, even though they're human, even though they're universal, even though other people of faith and of no faith have them, we are duty bound to still orient them towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, and one way to do it is to evaluate your intention all the time, right? Even attributes that you have already. So you're already naturally a generous person. It is still necessary to find a way to orient your naturally endowed generosity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One way to do that is to manifest your generosity for the sake of Allah where normally you would not have, meaning to find new expressions of it, right? So if you're already generous to your children, it could be difficult, because there's an element of, in Arabic we call it tahsil al-hasil, achieving the already achieved, because it's already there. It can be difficult to pinpoint how it is orienting towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than vocalizing an intention. So you might say, I love my children for the sake of Allah, but you're going to love them anyway, meaning it's difficult to draw a line between the two. So where can you show sincere love? And that is by manifesting love where otherwise perhaps you may not have naturally activated it, right? Which is why it's a sign of Iman to love for the sake of Allah and to hate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you activate it where it may not be activated, i.e. a stranger who is a believer, right? And pretty much consciously activating a feeling, a kind of treating that person with love, purely because that is what Allah and His Messenger commanded. Okay? And the same is true of compassion and so on and so forth. Finding new manifestations of it, finding new places and people to activate it with, so that there are these instances where it is done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is one. The other is to work on the quality where you find that the quality is lacking or the quality is weak. Why? Because it is part of taqwa. Because part of your mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to bring out of oneself, to develop in oneself, to build in oneself qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see in you. Does that make sense? As opposed to, again, the kind of individualistic attitude, which is to try to just be who you are. Does that make sense? You know, that tendency to kind of, well, you know, I'm not going to change for anybody. I am who I am, and kind of that the ultimate kind of statement of individualism, which is that people have to accept me as I am. Right? Well, actually, that's a pointless statement, because for a believer, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have to accept anybody as they are when it comes to rewarding them, because who you are as you are is essentially based upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed you with already. Your test in the dunya is to become more. The test in the dunya is to become more than who you are. That makes sense? Okay, so this is the point about seeking good character in taqwa. Right? So essentially we find value of good character in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is when it is through taqwa. Right? Otherwise, human beings in their potential for good character are equal. Okay? They're all the same. You know, anybody can be generous, anybody can be good, anybody can be compassionate, anybody can be loving, and so on. All right. And now, one of the things about taqwa that I want to mention, because Ramadan is here, and this is a kind of bit detailed, so we'll I'll rush through it a bit. So when he says seek good character in taqwa, Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda takes that line, rahmatullahi alayhi, he takes that line and he says that here Imam al-Muhasibi is also pointing to the fact that good character is one of the consequences of taqwa, meaning one of the results of taqwa is good character. So like the way prayer is a consequence of taqwa, and so is, you know, giving and charity and all of those other good characters. Good character is also a consequence of God consciousness, because your consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires you to treat Allah's creation with kindness, because it's Allah's creation. It's part and parcel of one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And hence the hadith, it's somewhat weak, but it's accepted widely by all ulama that the creation are the dependents of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the best of creation are those who are best to Allah's dependents. And of course the hadith, the merciful people are those who Allah has mercy upon, right? Irhamu man fil ard. Have mercy upon people of the earth. The one who is in the heavens will have mercy upon you. The famous hadith, the hadith of rahmah as they call it, the hadith of mercy. So as such, it is one of the consequences of taqwa. So anecdotally, he says that Al-Allama al-Firuzabadi, the famous lexicographer who compiled that massive Arabic dictionary, which is considered to be one of the most authoritative, he writes in one of his books, a book called Basair Dhawi Tamyiz fi Lata'if al-Kitab al-Aziz, which looks at subtleties of the Quran. He says he counts 27 effects of taqwa mentioned in the Quran. 27 effects of taqwa mentioned in the Quran. Right? I'm going to quickly go through them because Ramadan is the month of taqwa. Of the 27, 26 are preserved. One, for some reason, was missed in publication, right? So it's probably sitting in a manuscript somewhere. Let's go through them. So number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises or gives glad tidings of karamat, right? Of respect, of honor, perhaps even of miracles, right? الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ لَهُمُ الْبُشْرَى. Those who believe and they have taqwa, for them there are glad tidings in the dunya and in the akhirah. The second is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises help, or provides glad tidings of help and victory to people of taqwa. إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مُحْسِنُونَ. Indeed, Allah is with the people of taqwa and with the people of ihsan, of goodness, and they have like close meanings. The third is the people who have taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them knowledge and wisdom, right? So in tattaqullaha yaj'al lakum furqanan. If you have consciousness of Allah, meaning if you have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will grant you a furqan. Furqan is one of the names of the Quran, but over here, furqan means the ability to judge right from wrong, good from bad, to be able to make distinctions between contrasting things, right? That's the idea of furqan, because the word furqan comes from fa, ra, qaf, right? And faraq, that root means separation, right? So it gives a person, and wisdom is being able to separate the blurriness in things so that you end up placing each thing in its appropriate place. It's one of my favorite definition of wisdom. وَضْعُ الشَّيْءِ فِي مَحَلِّهِ, right? Placing everything in its place. Right. Okay. Then he says, number 4 is sins will be expiated as a result of taqwa, and that on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, the person of taqwa will be venerated according to the greatness of their reward on the day of judgment. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يُكَفِّرْ عَنْهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِ وَيُعْظِمْ لَهُ أَجْرًا, as the verse says. So whoever is conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will expiate their sins and will make their reward great on the day of judgment. The fifth is so the fifth is the one that basically went missing. Sorry, so of the 27. So Imam Sheikh Abdul Fattah says that it's probably in a manuscript that hasn't yet been studied or looked at, but it's missing from Al-Faris Abadi's book. The sixth is forgiveness. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, Allah is all forgiving and merciful. And then the other from the famous sequence of verses about taqwa in Surah Al-Talaq. The first is ease in one's affairs. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِ يُسْرًا. Whoever has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will put ease in his or her affairs. Then the eighth is al-khuruj min al-ghamm wal-mihna. That whoever has taqwa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove from them stress, sorrow, and trial, like the situations, trying situations that overwhelm a person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them a way out from it. So وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Whoever has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will give them a way out. Right? Even if that way out, I often say, and this is really important because I feel that in many times in my life I've experienced this, that a way out sometimes is almost a way out of a trial sometimes isn't the removal of the trial, but a way to cope with it. The ability to cope. Life is full of trials all the time, but probably like one of the greatest gifts is to be able to cope. And like contrast a person who mentally collapses over a trial that hundreds of other people suffer but are able to cope with and move on. Those people have been blessed simply with they've all faced a calamity. I mean, who doesn't face the death of a loved one at some point in their lives, right? For some people it's too much, it's too overwhelming, right? The grief overtakes them and they never recover and so on. Many people have had moments of like extreme fear. They face extreme fear. They faced the possibility of death. And so on. Some people never recover. They literally can't they develop a phobia, etc., right? So the ability to cope is a makhraj, is a way out. Anyway, so the ninth is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a result of taqwa, grants a person abundant rizq with peace and security. وَيَرْزُقُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. It's actually part of the verse in Surah Al-Talaq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants a person their sustenance in a manner that they could not have comprehended or they could not have anticipated. The 10th is النجاة من العذاب والعقوبة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants a person salvation from punishment on the day of judgment. ثم ننجي الذين اتقوا, as the verse says, that then we granted salvation to those who had taqwa. 11th is al-fawzu bil murad, that people attain success as they want it, meaning people are they're after success in a particular way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them that. وَيُنَجِّي اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا بِمَفَازَتِهِمْ is another verse, and Allah in Surah Al-Naba, Allah says, إِنَّ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ مَفَازًا. For the people of taqwa there is success, meaning they achieve their goals, the ability to achieve your goal as a form of success. The 12th is at-tawfiq wal-isma, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants a person his tawfiq. So Allah enables them, makes things easy, makes it easy for them to do good and to be good. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them isma, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them protection from sins. Many of us would have prayed the dua, isn't it? Rabbana Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadati, right? Why do we ask that dua? Allah wants us to do good. Allah wants us to do dhikr. Allah wants us to be grateful. Allah wants us to worship Him, right? But in this dua, we say, oh Allah, assist me. Help me to remember you. Right? Help me to be grateful to you. And help me to worship you well. أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Right? Why do we ask Allah's help in something that He has commanded us to do? Because we need it. Right? So one of the results of taqwa is this, is on both sides. So on one is tawfiq to do good, the other is protection from sin. All right? Because sometimes there's a sin that we just can't give up. You understand? And you feel helpless, right? So what do? You turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you ask Allah's assistance for it at the end of the day. And that's a show. That's actually a demonstration of sincerity that a person really wants to give it up. Right? And it's only people like that end up giving it up. People who really, really want to. And when they feel overwhelmed by a sin that they're committing, they turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek Allah's help. Okay, and that comes from taqwa. And remember, taqwa is inside. So taqwa is the development of an internal quality. So we have to work on our internal state. Okay, the 13 is ash-shahadatu lahum bis-sidq, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already testified to the fact that the people of taqwa are people of truth and sincerity. 14th is that these people are people of taqwa have already been declared in the Quran as the most noble, and that nobility, taqwa is the basis of nobility. So this is in the verse in Surah Al-Hujurat where Allah says, you were created from a man and a woman, and you've been made into tribes and nations so that you know one another. But the most noble among you is the one who has the most taqwa. The most noble among you is the one who has the most taqwa. So the people of taqwa are the people of true nobility. 15th is that is the glad tidings that they are beloved to Allah. The people of taqwa are the beloved of Allah. Inna Allah yuhibbul muttaqin. 16th is a declaration of their success. Again, and this is just different words for success. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares success in different ways. So the wording that was used before was understood to be success by achieving their objective. Here, in more general terms, Allah promises them success. If you want to be successful, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The people who have taqwa, their action, the taqwa is the internal state of taqwa is ultimately what reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, this is important. So I've kind of now giving you the evidence for what I've been saying, that taqwa is internal and it matters to Allah. So when in Surah Al-Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about sacrifice. You know the sacrifice of animals in Hajj. He declares that لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا. That, because this distinction was important, right? Because pagans leave food for their idols, don't they? So now Muslims are being instructed to make these sacrifices. We're making these sacrifices, aren't we? So Allah says, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا. That the blood and the meat of these animals is not what goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but what goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the taqwa in you. وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. Meaning the quality of taqwa is what Allah receives. Ultimately, when we do these deeds, we make sacrifices, we give charity, etc., etc., what travels to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the strength of meaning that is represented in our taqwa. That's what travels to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our intention, our sincerity, the consciousness of Allah with which we did the action. And that varies from person to person. So there is a person who does the same sacrifice, right? It's actually a good example. Hajj is a good example. I've been so many times, I can tell you the contrast, right? So when we go Hajj nowadays, this verse is speaking about sacrifice, right? Qurbani. And you guys will do Qurbani on Eid al-Adha. So apply this to your experience as well. So we do Qurbani. and we don't see the animal, we don't sacrifice the animal ourselves, don't touch it, don't buy it ourselves. All we do is give 100 or so pounds to the tour operator. And then we get a phone call on the day of Qurbani saying, your Qurbani has been done, you can shave your hair now. That's it. Now, if you think about it, when did my taqwa get activated? In that deed, meaning that it's almost, the deed has almost become automated, right? To the extent that the opportunity to, does that make sense? So, meaning that what needs to happen, the reason why it's so hard is because what needs to happen there is, there needs to be a moment at which my taqwa is activated as I do this deed. Even though I might have to be resigned to the fact that I'm not going to see the animal, I'm not going to personally buy the animal, and I'm not going to personally sacrifice the animal. Although all of those things help, being engaged in the deed helps, which is why it is more virtuous and better to personally sacrifice your animal. Right? My first Hajj was the only time I managed to see the animal that I sacrificed, because we decided not to go through the facilities in Mina, but come back to Mecca and find a local slaughterhouse and go there and sacrifice there. And you know, I bumped into my teacher that my first Hajj, and he advised that, and me and my father went hunting for a slaughterhouse in the middle of the night, and we found one. But that was my best Qurbani. That makes sense, because you're there, you're present. Now come back home and you're Eid al-Adha Qurbani. The same principle applies. Your taqwa reaches, right? But the act of Qurbani for you, for many of us, so all of us are young in that we're, you know, our parents are probably alive, right? Or in their kind of 60s to 80s, yeah, or would have been if they're not alive, rahimahumullah, right? But the point is that for many people who are younger, the act of Qurbani, yeah, is to find out that it was done on your behalf by your parents, right? Or slightly better, for your parents to come up and say, you know what, Qurbani is fard on you, cough up the money. That's right. For other people, it's having a chat and somebody reminds you that you have to give Qurbani, and it's like, okay, which poor relative are we going to give it to, and send the money back home, right? And sometimes it's done here and you kind of go and order it at the local grocery and you actually get to touch the meat and so on. But if taqwa is what reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is that taqwa for you and me? Is the question. What is it? So it could be, so obviously the obedience as a result of which you go and spend the 100 odd quid and do the Qurbani is a part of it. So that is an element. That is an element that we can pinpoint because we are obeying. We could have not done it, but instead we are doing it. That obedience is part of the taqwa. Does that make sense? But taqwa as fear, as conscious fear, as consciousness, that is missing in most of us, because often these deeds are done in a kind of, at least in the best case scenario, in a kind of semi-conscious, right, way, where you kind of, it's kind of automated. It's happening, and you're okay with it happening, and you are parting with money, but it's all easy because you're not connected. The one time I felt fully connected was when around Eid al-Adha I was traveling a lot. I can't remember, but I was involved in this project, and I was bouncing around from country to country, and it was Dubai, India, Pakistan, and then I managed to kind of find the relevant flights to get home to Sylhet like the afternoon of Eid, right? So I kind of arrived, and by the time I got to Sylhet, it was the afternoon of Eid. And the reason why that one's in my memory is because I got involved in distributing the meat. I got to, like a part of it, which previous year I had been in Bangladesh in Eid al-Adha, and I got to slaughter myself, but I don't recall being involved in anything else, but I did slaughter myself. But this time around, I got to actually, engage with the poor, and there was something else there. But that's it. Other than that, it's like when you're here, you just part with your money. Okay. Something different needs to happen, basically, when we do it. So think about that this year. Anyway, so in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that taqwa is what goes to Allah. 18 Nailul Jaza'i bil Mihna, innahu, that people who have taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them when they suffer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them when they're in any kind of suffering, when they're struggling in any way.
Is that 18?
This is 18, yes. إِنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِي وَيَصْبِرْ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Indeed, those who have taqwa and they are patient, so in difficulty, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not waste the reward of good people, of people of ihsan. Meaning that such people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides additional reward for their suffering. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala particularly accepts the sadaqah of people of taqwa. إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. When it comes to acceptance, Allah accepts from people who have taqwa. Right? 20. Taqwa is a sign of purity and cleanliness of the heart, indicated in the verse فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Right? And then 21 is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the highest level of iman, He describes it as in the form of taqwa, by saying, have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as it is due, the way it should be done. ittaqullaha haqqa tuqati. Right? So therefore, taqwa represents a kind of the perfection of our status as the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is how it was expressed in the Quran. 22, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises Jannah and all of the trappings of Jannah to the people of taqwa, as would be expected. But this is particularly a verse because we're looking at instances in the Quran and what the Quran promised people of taqwa. So إِنَّ الْمُتَّقِينَ فِي جَنَّاتٍ وَعُيُونٍ. 23 is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises peace to people of taqwa, peace from trials and calamity to people of taqwa. إِنَّ الْمُتَّقِينَ فِي مَقَامٍ أَمِينٍ. So if things are unsettled and unstable and so on and so forth in Muslim societies, you have to assume there is a lacking in taqwa. There are shortcomings when it comes to taqwa. Right? Yeah, it's kind of, you don't have to go very far to see it. It's kind of there to see. 24. The people of taqwa will receive and will enjoy a physically elevated position above all other creation on the day of judgment. وَالَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا فَوْقَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Those who have taqwa will be above them on the day of judgment. 25. People who have taqwa on the day of judgment will have no fear, no anxiety, no grief as a result of the fear of punishment. So those of you who've read about Qiyamah, you know that Qiyamah is supposed to be this place that is to be feared, right? The sun is below, the heat, the glare, people are so terrified they're unaware of their surroundings and so on and so forth, right? But the Quran repeats this line for people who are of good deeds, and He repeats this line for people of taqwa, and that is this line: La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. You've heard this verse again and again, right? It's all over the Quran. That they have no fear and they will not grieve. They have no fear and they will not grieve, because that is what people will face on the day of judgment. They will be grief stricken and they will be scared, because suddenly Those who didn't believe, suddenly the truth has manifested. Those who did believe are scared because they're thinking, have I done enough? You know, I believed, but I was neglectful and so on. But people who have taqwa will be freed from this fear. Right? Okay. So 26, they will receive, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant them spouses who will be agreeable. I pray that that is what everybody will receive in the dunya. But in the dunya, there is always somewhere or other, both for men and for women, there are some things that are always undesirable in our spouses. But in Jannah, there will be that won't be the case, and this is one of the things reserved for the people of taqwa. And finally, 27, قرب الحضرة واللقاء والرؤيا, probably the ultimate reward, which is that people of taqwa have been described in the Quran as people who will be in paradise, but ultimately في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر, that they will be in this position of truth or sincerity, if you like, next to the great king, meaning that they will have a place close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. عند مليك مقتدر, the all-powerful Allah, meaning the people of taqwa will enjoy a proximity to Allah that others will not enjoy. These are the 27 instances in the Quran in which Allah described a reward or a consequence of taqwa. And Ramadan is the month of that. Why? Because fasting reflects the quality of taqwa, which is why taqwa grows out of fasting. Because fasting is invisible the way taqwa is. Does that make sense? If you don't pray, people eventually notice. If you don't fast, nobody notices. Nobody knows that the wudu water that you used for rinsing your mouth, you swallowed it down deliberately to quench your thirst. Nobody knows. Nobody knows that you don't fast. Does that make sense? Because it is impossible to measure the absence of something. Do you understand? It's like, well, how do you prove that he hasn't done something? You understand? Which is why, and that is the ulama say that this is the reason why fasting is one of those few deeds about which Allah declares that it is for me. Allah takes for granted its sincerity. The sincerity of fasting, Allah takes for granted, and it says, "As-sawmu li kullu amal ibn Adam yudha'afu hasanatu ila 700 ضعف." Right? So every action of the son of Adam, Allah multiplies its rewards from 10 to 700 multiples. 10 to 700 times, right? The reward is multiplied. Except fasting. This is the hadith. Except fasting. Meaning that with fasting, Allah doesn't declare a number. He says, فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. Fasting is for my sake. It's taken for granted. It is for me. It has sincerity in it, and I reward it. And that is the essence of taqwa. Essentially, taqwa is something that is internal, that can only be measured by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It exists in there, only Allah knows it. And fasting is that moment, that one point in the year where everybody feels some taqwa, to varying degrees for different people. But you feel it, and we all know it, we experience it every year. And these are the benefits of it, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. Any questions? I wanna share a line, skipping a paragraph, just because it's really cool, and we're going on a break. But we'll repeat it, but I'll share it with you. He says, no, in fact, I'll translate the next paragraph. He says, know that every intelligence, every intellect, in fact, I'll translate it like that, every intellect that does not have with it three things is a deceptive intellect. Prioritizing the ability to put a the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ahead of disobedience of Him, meaning they have the ability to, when the two things conflict, they're able to put Allah's obedience before them, or at least they want that in their mind. That is what they prefer. They want to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as opposed to a person who in their mind they want to disobey Allah, right? They prefer to disobey. So the preference of obedience over disobedience is probably the best way to translate it. Preference of obedience over disobedience is the first quality. Preferring knowledge over ignorance, and preferring deen over dunya. You know what that means. Preferring deen over dunya. So anybody that does not have any intellect, that has not processed these three preferences, right, is an intellect that is deceptive. Think about that. I've thought about this, and it is pretty solid. This is in terms of, particularly in terms of intellect, because our intellect is where we get our rational thinking from. You have to ask yourself why rationality is so complicated. Meaning, why can't we rationally agree? Why is it that people can't rationally arrive at the same place? Why does it have to? Why does our rationality have to be so clouded, right? Particularly when it comes to questions of morality, right? Why is the answer to moral questions so contested? The answer to moral questions so contested. It's because of this. Okay, this plays a big part. If you do, meaning that if you don't have these underlying values, and these are values, this is preferring key contrasting elements of life, aspects of life, right? If people who don't share these values, they won't have the same moral outlook. It's not possible. Okay. Then he says, and every ilm وكل علم لا يصحبه ثلاثة أشياء. So he distinguishes between knowledge and intellect. So the first was intellect. Now he's saying, and every knowledge that does not accompany with it three things, it is simply an extra proof on the Day of Judgment. Meaning such knowledge is an extra proof on the Day of Judgment. Meaning on the Day of Judgment, it will just prove that you knew, and despite knowing, you still did wrong. So that's what it means by an extra proof on the Day of Judgment. The three qualities are كف الأذى بقطع الرغبة, desisting from harming others by not coveting what that person has, what people have. Make sense? So if you relate that to knowledge, right? So let's just say part of knowledge is knowing that somebody has something, right? So desisting from harming a person by not coveting what they have is a simple example, but you can kind of build on that. وَوُجُودُ الْعَمَلِ بِالْخَشْيَةِ, having amal out of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I know that this must be done, so I act upon it because I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Third, بَذْلُ الْإِنصَافِ بِالتَّبَاذُلِ وَالرَّحْمَةِ. Really interesting. Expending justice through sharing and mercy. Meaning, one of the requirements of knowledge is to always work for justice, always seek justice. By secrets of justice is sharing and mercy. Okay. Anyway, that bit I thought I should hear before the break.
Before you move on, you're going to make knowledge over ignorance, gain over dunya. You said knowledge over ignorance, gain over dunya.
Oh, knowledge over ignorance. He prefers knowledge over ignorance. He prefers obedience over disobedience. So what's the difference between knowledge and intellect?
the data and the processor.
Good. That's a good modern example. Imam al-Muhasibi himself, in another one of his books, he uses the example of light and sight. Yeah, and that intellect is sight, and knowledge is light. Right. So when you have to have sight to be able to see, but even if you have sight, if there isn't light to illuminate, it's not possible to see. So a person doesn't have to be blind, but they won't see in darkness. Does that make sense? So they're both necessary, but ultimately, another thing is that one of the things that he says is that he says ما عرف الله إلا بالعقل ولا أطيع إلا بالعلم. I find that really fascinating, right? So I'll mention that before we break as well, that Allah was only known through intellect. Allah can only be known through intellect. You can truly only know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through intellect. Intellect is necessary to know Allah, but knowledge is necessary to obey Allah. Knowledge is necessary to obey Allah. Allah is known through intellect, obeyed through knowledge. Part of the reason for that is because revelation alone doesn't necessarily compel a person to know Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't show himself with revelation. Does that make sense? However, revelation tells people what Allah wants them to do, and therefore obedience is only possible if Allah's will is known, if Allah's command for a person is known, right? And that knowledge is what's being referred to. If a person is going to obey Allah, they have to have knowledge of revelation. Otherwise, they don't know what Allah wants of them, even if through their intellect they've learnt of Allah, right? So, like the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was a child. So he came to recognize Allah, but he still would have needed knowledge of revelation, meaning knowledge in its purest form is the knowledge of revelation, right? He would have needed that in order to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him to do.
So what's the definition of wisdom?
So wisdom is a product of intellect and knowledge. So therefore, wisdom enables us to know the right place for everything. But then that can be complex. So, for example, knowing where to put something is a simple form of wisdom. Knowing how to respond to different situations is a complex form of wisdom. Does that make sense? Knowing how to judge a person for who they are and how they are is perhaps an even more complex form of wisdom, right? But ultimately, both knowledge as well as intellect are needed in order to arrive at wisdom. So wisdom, I suppose, is an amalgamation. Wisdom is a consequence of all of man's faculties. All of them come together to produce wisdom.
The way I thought it was knowledge is knowing that smoking is harmful, and then not smoking is the wisdom part. So putting what you know into.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the ways of defining it, but then putting essentially acting upon knowledge is a form of wisdom. Right? So depending on how you understand it, there's lots and lots of different definitions of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah grants wisdom to whomever He wants. وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Whoever has been granted wisdom, then he has been granted many things. Luqman is considered a Hakim. What is it that Luqman used to say? He used to say these deeply insightful things that demonstrated knowledge of the human condition and so on. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the prophetic duty as reciting the book, the duty of the Prophet ﷺ as reciting the book uh, uh, purifying, meaning providing spiritual purification, teaching the book, and teaching wisdom. In that verse, some of the ulama say that over here wisdom is the hadith, is the sunnah. So in different contexts, wisdom is understood in different ways. But in the context of something something more than intellect and knowledge, wisdom is the ability to use intellect and knowledge to put things in their correct place, including action. Make sense? The opposite of not placing things in their right place is oppression. So the definition of oppression is وضع الشيء في غير محله, to put things where they do not belong, is the definition of oppression. Dhulm. Yeah. Anything else? Any questions?
I have a two-part. But outside of fasting, is there any other way to gain taqwa? And that's my second point. Taqwa is sort of this abstract idea, and so Allah has tied it to a physical thing, which is fasting. And prayer was prescribed for the remembrance. So each of the 5 pillars have been tied to an abstract idea, which is tied to. So what is Hajj, and what abstract ideas they tie back to? Essentially, do you see what I mean? If Hajj,
These things are not
what is it?
codified
Hmm.
concepts that have some sort of exclusive association. I mean, these associations of dhikr with salah and taqwa with fasting they don't necessarily represent an exclusivity, but a kind of dominant feature, right? So you can you can identify it. Now, in Hajj, one of the dominant features, and Ghazali speaks about this, is that one of the dominant features in Hajj is effort, right? Yeah, so effort and sacrifice, because of the fact that even today when Hajj is luxurious, or can be, apparently there are 15,000-20,000 pound Hajj packages where you get buffets in Mina. I've seen pictures of them. But once upon a time, Mina was this crazy tough place, where people were living under the scorching sun, in these thin tents, and then it became luxurious when in 1990 something they installed the fireproof tents and put air conditioning units on top, right? Suddenly you have cool air in the desert. It becomes luxurious, and now they've put plasterboards instead of the tent material, and now the coolers actually work, right? And you can go into a Mina tent now, and it's freezing cold. But if you fork out the money, you can have one of those tents, and it's not 50 people inside, but just a small group of people, everyone with their own room, and a 24/7 buffet, right? But despite that, you can't escape the hardship, unless you were so unwell that somebody was pushing you on a wheelchair, because the heat is there all the time. As soon as you step outside, the crowds are there. If you are able to walk, then you have to walk, right? Then you walk. It's almost inevitable that you will. And if you're one of those people who are used to luxury, etc., then you're going to walk more than you've ever done in your life, because there's no transport, nothing, unless you hire a chopper. You have to walk, because I think even if you manage to catch a taxi or a bus, it only goes about a third of the way, or something, right? And I think I took somebody by taxi once who wasn't feeling very well, and the taxi was torture, because all of it was in traffic. So that hardship and the almost like a sacrifice by necessity is a big part of Hajj. So the Prophet says, Al-Hajju, Al-Hajju wal-Thajj. Hajj is defined by loud voices and hardship, and hard work. Right? Anyway, so there's these there are these things have a kind of a powerful association, but then it's not exclusive. So in Hajj, there is a dhikr association with Hajj as well, right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Over there, the emphasis is on takbir. So on the day of Eid al-Adha, the emphasis on takbir, the emphasis on talbiyah, right, is an emphasis on dhikr. In salah, like there is an emphasis on dhikr, there's also an emphasis in dua. One of the meanings of salah is dua, right? You know, and so on. So other meanings are associated, but there is a kind of overbearing association of one thing over others, but they're not exclusive. Okay, what was your second question?
Is there other ways to attain taqwa?
Other than the fast itself?
Yeah.
Well, the thing about fasting being associated with taqwa is that naturally taqwa grows inside of a person as a consequence of what I call spiritual nourishment. So the way your body is physically nourished by food, your soul is, this is a bit of an oxymoron, right? So your soul is physically nourished by the absence of food. Does that make sense? So your soul is strengthened when you deprive it of your desires, your animal, because essentially your soul and your body exist together, but they are essentially contradictory. Does that make sense? Meaning that they belong in two different places. They belong they're from two different paradigms. One is celestial in nature, one is from the heavens, one is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, I blew in him from my soul. Meaning that's the literal meaning, right? What that means, we don't know. We say that the soul is from the knowledge of Allah. Allah himself says that in the Quran. The soul is from my affair. And you know very little, right? So Allah essentially told us, you don't know, right? And I'm not telling you. But yet literally Allah says, it's from my soul. نَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. That I placed inside the son of Adam from my soul. And that is where life emanates from, right? But the body is earthly. So the two pull, essentially they're pulling towards two. One is being pulled down by gravity, the other is pulling towards the heavens, right? And essentially what revelation does, what deen, religion and revelation does is it gives us a way of life that keeps a window open for the soul to enjoy a continued connection with its origin. Does that make sense? Yes? And therefore, their means of sustenance are also contradictory. So while one is sustained by food and earthly and worldly desire and animal desires, right? The other is sustained by almost the opposite of that, by the absence of that. And a balance is required in order to keep equilibrium, right? So because in fasting, naturally the body is deprived of what normally nourishes the body, the soul naturally thrives. And that's the essence of spirituality. The spirituality is the strength. Spirituality is essentially the constant activation of the soul. It's like that window into the heavens is opened more and more and more the more a person is spiritual or spiritually active. Make sense? So fasting already, the fasting itself is already almost like naturally more conducive to spirituality, right? What then happens is it's easier to worship. You feel more inclined to worship and so on. The best thing to do in Ramadan is to now take advantage of that and to yield to that and not give in to things like laziness and so on, and to build your whole kind of day around more and more acts of worship, because you won't feel like that at any other time. So you take advantage. So essentially, building taqwa is a mixture of taking advantage, and taking advantage of Ramadan. Does that make sense? And one shouldn't get into the illusion of thinking that somehow it's hypocritical to just like pour everything into Ramadan, even though after Ramadan I'm not going to do much. You understand? So in your mind you can think, oh, you know, I'm going to go all crazy in Ramadan and go with the Ramadan fever, but like a hypocrite after Ramadan, literally on the day of Eid, it all stops. Well, actually, that is exactly how it is. That is what's intended. Didn't the Prophet ﷺ do the same thing? He was more generous in Ramadan. He worshipped more in Ramadan. You know, they say he tied his belt in the month of Ramadan and so on. The Prophet himself was like that. Obviously, the contrast between the Prophet outside Ramadan and inside Ramadan would have been less than our contrast, right? We should be completely different people in Ramadan, outside Ramadan. Now, what you take out of that into the period after Ramadan is now a big question, right? It should be fairly easy to do more worship in Ramadan. What you take out of it is probably something that one has to think about. And all you can take out, I think the most important thing to take out of it is some habits. Take some habits, things that you don't, one thing or two things or three things that you've done in Ramadan that you kind of take away and you think it's essential that I continue these outside Ramadan. Hopefully, what you will take from this is something more than your fara'id, because the fara'id we should be doing anyway. But in terms of nawafil, in terms of dhikr, in terms of tilawah of the Quran, or something like that. Does that make sense? For all of us, we should get to a point where Ramadan is an increase, right, in ibadah that at least has existence outside of Ramadan, as opposed to Ramadan is the activation of things that are missing outside of Ramadan. That we should at least try to get to that stage. How you do that? Most people who are serious about Ramadan and serious about worship and serious about deen are able to continue almost a momentum of some kind past Ramadan. So Shawwal, you're keeping the six. Some people are keeping the 6 fasts of Shawwal. So it kind of carries on, and then at different times you end up with the slump, right? Some people are able to keep it going for a long time, other people for less, and so on. But people do end up with a slump. And I think what you have to do, what I found useful, is you have to create other moments of solitude, of space, right? To kind of recreate the Ramadan, the spirit of Ramadan. Now, what that is for you is up to you. Whether it is something that you do with like-minded friends and it's a retreat, it's a spiritual retreat, whether it's a umrah for other people, some people do it by spacing things out so that they have Ramadan as a big part of the year, and then another part of the year they'll do an i'tikaf private in the masjid or something like that. Or some people, they'll go to Tabligh or something like that because they find that spiritually uplifting. Other people, they go to the Sheikh Zawiya at another point in the year. So they have this big high in Ramadan, and then there is this gradual slump. And when they feel they've hit not rock bottom, but they've kind of gotten back to their normal low, there's another time when they go away somewhere, or they do something to try to feel another boost, and then that carries them on for a while. that make sense? It's perfectly normal to want these boosts. That's how human beings are. It's a lifetime of effort to end up with the kind of consistency where your outside of Ramadan level is quite high. Do you understand? And then you just have an incremental increase in Ramadan because you free yourself up, right? So, what is the minimum outside of Ramadan? So your fard is obviously shouldn't be considered a minimum. But beyond your fard, your lifestyle basics should be a wadhifa of dhikr every day. Right? That is a mixture of your daily du'as. It can vary in length, but a mixture of your daily du'as of protection and of dhikr. Because protection you need throughout the year, so it's a selfish need to need protection. Your daily adhkar, right? Some of your adhkar after salah, and the adhkar of normal everyday life, lifestyle stuff. Reading the dua when you eat, reading the dua after you eat, when you go to the toilet, when you get on the car, when you leave home. This is dhikr embedded into lifestyle. Yes? Some tilawah every day should be part of your wadhifa. I mean, your daily routine should have some tilawah, some engagement with the Quran, so that if in the Ramadan you're completing, say, 2 khatams of the Quran, outside of Ramadan, perhaps through the whole year at least you're completing 1, right? If not, then one every 3 months. If not, if you can do better than 1 a month, a juz a day, whatever you can manage, there should be some sort of engagement with the Quran throughout the year to avoid a kind of an absence of connection with the Quran. And you should mix recitation as well as reading. You understand the difference? So recitation of the Quran is ritual, meaning you recite even if you don't understand. So there is a spiritual benefit in that, right? And then there is reading the Quran, i.e. where understanding is not compromised. So if you don't know Arabic, then you're not going to read it in Arabic, you're going to read it in English. Both are important, okay? And then the other thing is study. I think those are minimums. Sorry? If you're already doing that and you want to go beyond, then you increase those. So think about this. Think about it like, and nawafil, sorry, I should have mentioned salah, nafil salah. Okay? So whatever you want to go from. So if you only do your fard, you need to do your sunnah. Because the sharia is beautiful in that it's all prioritization is embedded within it. Your fard is your most important, then in your salah, your fard is your most important, then it's your sunnah. And then it's your nawafil. And among the nawafil, there are prominent ones like tahajjud and others less prominent. And then there's rakats of salah, just any time. Anytime when salah isn't makruh, you can just do extra rakats, right? So now let's look at the stories of the pious. How do they stand out? Not by the fact that they walked on water and they levitated. That's not how their piety stood out, is it? Their piety stood out because of the volume of what they did, the enjoyment they took out of doing the things that we do to a minimum. They did it as though they loved it and they enjoyed it so much. So now they're doing, like, it's not 8 rakats of tahajjud, it's like half the night, it's a third of the night, it's reciting half the Quran in tahajjud and so on, right? It's a completion of the Quran a day, or half of the Quran, or a tenth of the Quran, and so on. But has to be balanced with lifestyle. Perhaps people who are able to be that dedicated had a particular lifestyle that facilitated it. Other people, it's as much as they can, trying to get to a point where it goes beyond routine and becomes enjoyment. Okay, so there is a quality aspect and a quantity aspect. If you're doing it and it's of high quality, do more and try to get to a point where it becomes something that you enjoy, right? Does that make sense? It's really important to do it consciously, by the way, because unconscious dedication to worship can result in obsession. So people who don't do things in a way that is meaningful, and it's just about sustaining a habit, right? can easily fall into difficult problems like repeating their wudu again and again, and obsessive behavior, and are able to they become incapable of detachment, meaning that for them it's like they get irrationally kind of anxious if they've missed something or something is out of place and so on, meaning that they develop obsessive compulsive behaviors if their engagement isn't conscious and based on knowledge and considered. You understand my point? So that's why I said with all of your worship, the whole kind of study and continuing to increase in knowledge should go along with it, meaning that we're a balance of intellect, so those things he mentions, right? Intellect, knowledge of deen, practice of the deen. Does that make sense? Meaning things are done consciously in a considered fashion, understanding what the benefits are, and habits are used pragmatically, meaning you do something as a habit because psychologically human beings need habits. Does that make sense? But you don't allow something routine to become the reason why you do it. The reason why you do it remains your ikhlas, remains your spiritual continuity, remains the meaning behind it, remains your taqwa and so on.
If we making it hard, making it hard, we use the those things that we fear that we go well with that concept.
That's a type of consciousness. But perhaps that, along with the fact that in that moment you're responding to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanding you to do something, that in the moment when you pray, you are connecting your soul to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because those connections are required on a daily basis, that you're taking inspiration for the rest of your day, or the time in between now, this prayer and the next prayer. All of these meanings are important, and none of them should take you away from your life in between. So your dedication to your prayer shouldn't detach you from your duty to your children, your duty to your husband or your wife. Romantic attachments between spouses shouldn't suffer. Business interests shouldn't suffer. Social ties shouldn't suffer. Does that make sense? Meaning that balance is necessary, and it's easy to lose that balance and end up detached. You understand? And it is spirituality that achieves balance is preferred to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is the sunnah way to spirituality that doesn't have the balance and is of a, I wouldn't use the word extreme, but is of an unbalanced nature. Unbalanced as in a person starts to become so fixated on their spiritual work and their spiritual efforts that they detach themselves from society and don't marry or leave their marriage or leave their children and end up in a zawiyah for the rest of their lives, in a cave and so on, which some people have criticized and others have said that is that person's prerogative. But what we know for certain is that the Prophet ﷺ has declared his sunnah to be a balanced way. You heard this hadith here, where two men came, observed the Prophet's worship, and they thought the Prophet didn't worship enough. Three people, yes. Three people, right? And they came, they thought. So the hadith says, كَأَنَّهُمْ تَقَالُّوهَا. They thought, is that it? The Prophet, is that it? So then one of them thought, but then one of them commented and said that, well, of course, this is the Prophet of Allah. All of his past and future sins are forgiven. He doesn't have to worship that much. He's already made it, right?
Do you worship to occupy, like, not the project, but you just occupy it and not do nothing?
But that's okay. But that's a perfectly good, rational engagement. But don't limit it to that. That's what I'm saying. You understand? It's perfectly good thought process, but don't limit it to that. And remember that worship is very, very, very multidimensional. So with intention, playing with your children is worship. With the right intention, enjoying, it's a sadaqah to enjoy spousal relationships. Prophet ﷺ describes it as a sadaqah, right? Of all of the things, feeding the desire of the animal self is described as a sadaqah, meaning that there is a balance, right? But even in that balance where one is doing worldly activities, the presence of taqwa internally and the presence of intention and sincerity internally can turn those things into worship. For the person who has found a particular passion and dedication for knowledge, ulama say that is the greatest ibadah. That person shouldn't compromise this unique talent or this unique engagement for excessive worship, because this is a greater worship. Does that make sense? Because this is something that the majority of people won't engage in. And because it has always been something for the few, once a person finds that attachment and finds that talent, they're fulfilling a fard kifaya. And all fards are greater than all nafals. You understand? Yeah, I forgot what my thought process. Oh yeah, those three companions, right? So one of them says, "Amma ana فأصلي الليل ولا أرقد فأقوم الليل ولا أرقد." I'll stay up all night and I won't sleep. Meaning he's going to stay up all night and do salah all night and he won't sleep. The other one says that I'm going to fast all the time and I won't break my fast. And the other one says, "أما أنا فلا أتزوج." Right? I'm not going to marry. He's going to remain unmarried for the rest of his life, right? Because he felt that was an obstacle, that was something that got in the way of worship. The Prophet ﷺ heard about this, right? And he says, what is it that I hear that these people are saying such and such? He said, "I am the most God-fearing among you. أنا أتقاكم لله وأخشاكم له." I am the most God-fearing among you. I have the most taqwa among you. And I pray and I sleep, right? I fast and I don't fast. And I marry and I have wives, right? I have a married life. And then the next bit is very, very telling. He says, "And whoever turns away from the sunnah is not from me." That's the closing line of the hadith, meaning that balance is important, right? So
Would you say balance is more linked with choosing a suitable time to deal with that question?
yeah, well, that balance is part of that. Balance is also recognizing that that while a person's obligation is to be more akhirah focused, it is possible to end up being rewarded for being akhirah focused by receiving attachments in the dunya. Attachments of the dunya, meaning you end up with trappings of the dunya. So a person ends up with success and wealth and so on and so on and so forth, and fame and etc. And then part of their worship becomes to manage that, to fulfill certain obligations and duties that are towards the dunya without becoming attached to it. Meaning the challenges are complex, and in order to process those challenges and to deal with them, one has to have a balance of dedication to worship as well as knowledge to deal with these complexities. Do you understand? So, but first, recognition of the complexities and not just being one track. Okay? Inshallah. And recognizing that in that complexity, one's state of mind and heart turns all of it into worship. And that worship is complex. For the mujahid, that time in the battlefield, killing and maiming is worship. Right? But in a unique circumstance. Does that make sense? And while for the talib al-ilm, reading and seeking knowledge is worship. But this is all above the minimum, which is fulfilling one's fara'id and one's duties. Okay, I'll see you after Ramadan, inshallah. And the brothers will let you know exactly when, but just roughly it's the second Monday after Eid. So Monday after Eid we won't continue. the one after the war. Okay, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, no problem.
And everybody, inshallah, pray for me.